I'm taking on the ultimate survival challenge. Can I really survive 81 days alone in Alaska's wilderness after a plane crash? Let's find out. This is the true story of Leon Crane, the lone survivor of a B-24 bomber crash into the frozen Alaskan wilderness on December 21st, 1943, during a routine training flight. Crane battles hunger, isolation, and the elements for 81 days with only a parachute, 2 matchboxes, and a small knife. Let's go straight into the narrative, since you never know when this information may save you or if you appreciate these kinds of tales. Make sure to subscribe to our channel if you do. The crash of life. During a routine training flight during World War II, the B-24 bomber Iceberg went into a tailspin after an engine failure. The pilot, in a state of panic, ordered the crew to bail out more than 130 miles from their base. Only 2 people made it out alive, and one of them was Leon Crane, who, as he dangled from his parachute in the freezing Alaskan wilderness, watched as the plane went down and caught fire. This was just the beginning of his 81-day ordeal. Upon touching down in the frozen wilderness, Crane searched for other survivors. He spotted Sergeant Richard Pompeo's parachute but couldn't find him. His instinct was to investigate further. When it became apparent that the 3 surviving passengers couldn't have survived, the pilot Crane turned towards a small frozen river in the hopes that it might guide him to safety. It was later discovered that Sergeant Richard Pompeo, who had also parachuted, didn't make it either. Crane had no time to prepare for the terrible accident that began the struggle. He had to confront an instant and terrible threat to his life. Without shelter, he would not have survived the brutal Alaskan winter, so he constructed a temporary shelter from his parachute. Despite the biting winds, the lightweight fabric kept Crane warm at bay. The next thing he knew, he needed a fire. He had 2 matchbooks, but it was next to impossible to light them in the snow with the wind howling. Eventually, he retrieved a letter from his father and used it as tinder, starting a small flame that would become his lifeline, offering comfort and a vital morale boost against the brutal cold. It was a mental and physical hardship to make it through the first night in the Alaskan wilderness in December, when there was almost 20 hours of total darkness. Over the course of the next week, Crane stayed close to the crash site in the vain hope of finding assistance, but he saw no one. He had spent the previous night huddling around his little fire, battling hopelessness. Days passed without rescue ever showing up. Crane was ill-prepared for the harsh Alaskan winter, since he had little food and his improvised home provided little protection. As the harsh reality of his utter isolation hit him, he made the decision to go further down the little frozen river he had discovered, clinging to the hope that it might guide him to civilization or, failing that, provide him a greater chance of finding food and shelter. Every step was challenging. As he trudged through the heavy snow and icy temperatures, Crane's determination paid off. Eventually, he came upon a tiny cabin where he discovered a stove, canned food, a gun, and other necessary survival gear. The stove provided him with much-needed warmth, and the cabin became his refuge. He felt safe for the first time since the accident thanks to the canned food and the heat. At first, he thought the owner might come back eventually, but that never happened. Over the next 6 weeks, Crane would spend his days, and sometimes more than one day, exploring the area, hoping to find a village or someone who could help him get rescued. Little did he know that he was over 100 miles from the closest civilization. The food supply was decreasing with the passage of time, and he came to the realization that he needed to take action in order to live. He so decided to leave the shelter. Crane pondered his next action for days before making this choice. With his supplies running low and no hope of rescue in sight, he retreated into the Alaskan wilderness, this time armed only with a rifle and the meager food he had stashed away. With an iron will, he forded the frozen river that had brought him to the cabin, and for the next 2 weeks he battled the elements at every turn. The deep snow, freezing temperatures, and treacherous ice made every step a challenge. Despite his body's cries for rest, Crane persisted in his journey, guided only by his instincts rather than any clear directions. Eventually, after days of tiring travel, he found another cabin, just like the first, filled with essential supplies and even more canned food. Food, fuel, and a means of subsistence. He found a little respite from his hardships with this finding. Crane took use of the cabin as a place to relax, recharge, and plot his next move. He realized he couldn't remain forever. He had to keep going if he wanted to live. Before setting off on his next leg of the trip, he gathered his thoughts, rationed his supplies, and planned his next move. The last ditch of effort. As Leon Crane left the second cabin behind, he entered the last ditch of his survival struggle. Each day brought fresh mental and physical hurdles, and he had no idea if he would make it. His food supply was dwindling, and he continued to walk despite the uncertainty. In the end, he had covered more than 100 miles. Crane had to be vigilant and use his navigational abilities to locate the safest way ahead due to the difficult terrain, which included concealed ice spots and thick snowdrifts that could potentially cause harm. The capacity of the crane to adapt and persist in the face of these obstacles was crucial to his life. Since the weather was unpredictable, with unexpected storms that may transform a tough voyage into a nearly impossible one. As time went on, Crane's physical condition worsened due to the relentless cold and inadequate nutrition. Each step became more painful than the last, but his determination remained unwavering. He knew that stopping was not an option if he wanted to survive, so he had to keep moving. The drive to find help kept him putting one foot in front of the other, even though his body screamed for rest. After several weeks of this on a flat passage, Crane saw a wilderness airstrip, which gave him renewed hope. He knew that this represented a link to civilization and the possibility of rescue. As he explored the area around the airstrip, he discovered another cabin, this time with smoke rising from its chimney. This was the first sign of human presence he had seen. At last, a man came out of the cabin, his face contorted with astonishment as he saw the crane. He hurriedly welcomed the crane inside, where he gave him food, shelter, and warmth. The hunter made sure that the crane was flown out the next day, and the next day the crane was finally safe. With Leon Crane's rescue, an extraordinary odyssey of survival came to a close. His story is an inspiring testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of perseverance in the face of adversity. Little did he know at the time, but these food-filled cabins were common in Alaska and were meant for people who got lost. Little did he know that these were going to play an essential part in his 81-day survival. We hope you enjoyed today's survival story. Post a comment below describing the part of this real story that piqued your attention. Stay interested and strong until our next episode. In the meanwhile, if you have any particular tales you'd want us to explore, please let us know.